Welcome to Defense Briefing. The content of the briefing includes Russian defeat in Ukraine vital for Europe. Macron. Li Auto jumps most in over a year as profits withstand price war. It's dangerous to shrug off a long war. Dirty money is destroying Sudan. Biden will urge Congress's top leaders to keep the government open and send aid to Ukraine and Israel. Russian defeat in Ukraine vital for Europe. Macron. BBC. French President Emmanuel Macron has stated that defeating Russia in Ukraine is key to Europe's security. European leaders have agreed to establish a coalition to provide Ukraine with medium and long-range missiles and bombs. Macron did not rule out the possibility of sending Western ground troops to Ukraine, but acknowledged that there were differences among the allies. Russian troops have recently made gains in Ukraine, which is facing severe arms shortages. Ukraine relies heavily on Western allies, particularly the US, for modern weaponry supplies. Li Auto jumps most in over a year as profits withstand price war. Bloomberg. Li Auto, a Chinese electric vehicle (EV) maker, saw its shares surge after reporting strong earnings. The company posted a net income of 11.8 billion Chinese yuan, $1.6 billion, for 2021, making it the first of the major Chinese EV startups to achieve an annual profit. Li Auto's vehicle shipments more than doubled last year, contributing to its strong financial performance. Analysts praised the company's profitability per vehicle in the fourth quarter, with Jefferies Financial Group and Citigroup highlighting its better-than-expected results. Despite ongoing price competition, Li Auto expects its gross profit margin to stay above 20% in 2022. The company plans to launch new vehicles this week, which analysts believe could further boost its sales growth and profitability. Other Chinese EV stocks, including BYD, XPeng, and NIO, also rose in response to Li Auto's positive earnings. It's dangerous to shrug off a long war. Bloomberg. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has not had as significant an impact on the Russian economy as initially feared. Despite Western-imposed sanctions, Russia has managed to find business partners in the East, particularly China and India, which have helped to alleviate some of the economic burden. Additionally, Russia has not been able to inflict the level of economic damage on Europe that was expected, with natural gas prices now back to pre-war levels. This situation, however, is not without risks. Declining commodity prices and rising container freight rates globally are concerning indicators for the market. The war in Ukraine has also had a significant impact on the country's economy, with massive infrastructure damage and a loss of troops. Ukraine is also struggling to secure aid from the US, with concerns growing about how long it can sustain the conflict. If the war were to end, the consequences would be deep, and the EU would likely struggle to fill the gap left by US aid. The outcome of the upcoming US presidential election is likely to have an impact on the situation, with a Trump victory potentially fast-tracking an end to hostilities. Social media companies, particularly in the US, are facing increased pressure for regulation. The issue of free speech versus harmful content is being debated in the Supreme Court, with implications for the industry and society as a whole. The outcome of the case is uncertain and could have wide-ranging effects. Dirty money is destroying Sudan. Foreign affairs. Sudan is facing a catastrophic humanitarian crisis, with millions of people displaced by conflict and on the brink of famine. The conflict is not only a result of long-standing tensions between Sudanese armed forces and paramilitary groups, but also involves new international actors who are exploiting Sudan's resources and supporting various factions. Middle Eastern countries, including the United Arab Emirates, UAE, Egypt, and Iran, see opportunities to access Sudan's ports, use it as a base for regional conflicts, and strengthen their own interests. These countries are involved in the illicit gold trade and are providing military aid to the warring factions. The United States, as a key player in the region, must increase financial pressure on these actors to help resolve the conflict. This can be done through anti-money laundering instruments, network sanctions, and targeted sanctions on individuals and companies involved in the illicit gold trade and arms deliveries. The UAE, in particular, has a history of money laundering and illicit gold imports, and the US and its allies should increase scrutiny on its activities, share information with the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, and issue a business advisory warning about the risks of doing business with the UAE. Sanctions should also be imposed on Sudanese entities involved in violence and corruption. The US and its partners must also support pro-democracy and civil society groups in Sudan, increase cooperation with the International Criminal Court, and refuse to recognize any Sudanese government that emerges from violence. These measures would help to undermine the financial networks that support the conflict and strengthen the hand of diplomats working towards a resolution. The U.S. has important interests in Sudan, including countering Russia's influence in the region, supporting democracy, and preventing the growth of Islamist groups. By applying financial and diplomatic pressure on key actors, the U.S. can play a crucial role in bringing peace to Sudan. Biden will urge Congress's top leaders to keep the government open and send aid to Ukraine and Israel. Associated Press. President Joe Biden met with the top 4 leaders of Congress to discuss the need to act quickly to avoid a government shutdown at the beginning of March and to pass emergency aid for Ukraine and Israel. The leaders in attendance included House Speaker Mike Johnson, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, was also present. The purpose of the meeting was to prioritize U.S. national security interests, which includes funding the government and avoiding a shutdown. Parts of the government may start to scale back operations as early as Friday if a spending deal is not reached and legislation is not sent to Biden for approval. The House is under pressure to pass a $95 billion national security package that includes aid for Ukraine, Israel, and the Indo-Pacific, which the Senate has already passed with bipartisan support. House Speaker Mike Johnson faces a defining dilemma on Ukraine. CNN. House Speaker Mike Johnson has the fate of a democracy and a people in his hands. It's not the United States, which will survive, even if the coming general election results in another existential test for the constitutional system. The country Johnson has the power to save is Ukraine, 2 years after Russian President Vladimir Putin invaded, decreeing that it didn't have the right to exist. Ukraine's soldiers, trapped in a World War I-style hellscape of trench warfare, are running out of bullets. There are signs that Russia may be about to break a stalemate and tip the war its way. Johnson, a backbencher who was the last-ditch choice to lead the mutinous House GOP majority last year, could relieve Ukraine's agony and help ensure its survival as an independent nation in the coming days. He could allow a vote on a bill that includes $60 billion in aid that the Pentagon says is needed to allow Kyiv to continue to effectively fight. It would likely pass with a comfortable bipartisan majority. The Louisiana Republicans' reluctance to do so is a commentary on the growing power of GOP frontrunner Donald Trump, the sharp turn of his party away from its globalist pro-democracy heritage and perhaps even his own ambition, since borrowing Democratic votes to finance Ukraine's defense could cost him the speakership. The speaker is coming under extreme pressure on multiple fronts, at home and abroad, as coinciding crises that he's postponed over his young speakership come to the boil at once. Most immediately, without a budget deal with the Democratic Senate, the government could hurtle into a partial shutdown by the weekend. His predicament will be highlighted at a meeting of the top 4 congressional leaders at the White House on Tuesday, called by President Joe Biden. Putin needs to keep Russia in a permanent state of war to stay in power, expert says. Yahoo! Russian President Vladimir Putin needs to ensure his country stays in a permanent state of war to consolidate his power, according to a new book from Marie Mendras, a professor at Sciences Po University's Paris School of International Affairs. He has the logic of a paranoid leader, Mendras told France 24 on Monday. The man is in survival mode, added Mendras. Joe Biden hopes Gaza ceasefire could come as soon as Monday. South China Morning Post. President Biden has said he hopes to have a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict in Gaza start by next Monday as the warring parties appeared to close in on a deal during negotiations in Qatar that also aim to broker the release of hostages. Negotiators are seeking a 6-week halt to the fighting and the release of Israeli hostages held in Gaza since Hamas' October 7 attack on southern Israel sparked the war. A deal could include the release of several hundred Palestinian detainees held by Israel, media reports suggest. Biden said he hoped a ceasefire would start within days. China's Xi chooses to visit Serbia in 2024, Balkan leader says. Bloomberg. Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to visit Serbia in 2024, according to Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić. The visit comes as China's relationship with Europe faces strain due to trade disputes and the war in Ukraine. Xi's trip to Serbia would be his first visit to Europe in over 4 years. China and Serbia have been cultivating closer ties in recent years, with China providing aid to Serbia during the pandemic and the two countries canceling tariffs on most tax items under a new free trade agreement. Additionally, a new yuan clearing arrangement was established between China and Serbia to promote the use of the Chinese currency in cross-border transactions. You sure made a fine mess of this, Patino. Yahoo! It took all of 24 hours for Richard Pitino to go from finalist for National Coach of the Year to overlord of one of the most demoralizing losses in years for the New Mexico men's basketball program. Well, my dear viewers, it seems we have quite the collection of news stories today. From European security concerns to booming electric vehicle earnings, and from the ongoing conflict in Ukraine to the dire situation in Sudan, there's certainly a lot to unpack. So, let's dive right in and take a closer look. First up, we have French President Emmanuel Macron emphasizing the importance of defeating Russia in Ukraine for Europe's security. European leaders have agreed to provide Ukraine with missiles and bombs, and the possibility of sending Western ground troops is not off the table. The situation in Ukraine is indeed grave, with Russian troops making gains and Ukraine facing severe arms shortages. But let's not forget the complexities and differences among the allies. It's not going to be an easy task, that's for sure. Next, we have Li Auto, a Chinese electric vehicle maker, making headlines with its impressive earnings. They're the first major Chinese EV startup to achieve an annual profit, and their vehicle shipments more than doubled last year. Despite ongoing price competition, Li Auto expects its profit margin to remain strong in 2022. This is undoubtedly good news for the company and the Chinese EV industry as a whole. Keep an eye out for their new vehicle launches, which could further boost their sales growth. Now, let's talk about the situation in Ukraine. Despite initial fears of significant economic damage, Russia has managed to find business partners in the East, particularly China and India, to alleviate some of the burden. Natural gas prices have returned to pre-war levels, and Europe hasn't suffered as much as expected. But don't let this fool you, my friends. Declining commodity prices and rising container freight rates are concerning indicators for the market. The war in Ukraine has also taken a toll on the country's economy, with infrastructure damage and a loss of troops. Ukraine's struggle to secure aid from the US is a growing concern. The outcome of the upcoming US presidential election could have a significant impact on the situation. So, let's keep a close watch on how this all unfolds. Moving on, we have the issue of social media regulation. Companies in the US are facing increased pressure in the debate between free speech and harmful content. The Supreme Court is currently deliberating on this matter, and the outcome is uncertain. This case has wide-ranging implications for the industry and society as a whole. How will the court strike a balance between these competing interests? Only time will tell. Now, let's turn our attention to Sudan, a country facing a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Millions of people have been displaced by conflict, and famine looms large. The conflict involves not only long-standing tensions within Sudan but also the involvement of international actors exploiting Sudan's resources. Middle Eastern countries like the UAE, Egypt, and Iran are using Sudan for their own interests, involving themselves in the illicit gold trade and providing military aid to warring factions. To resolve the conflict, the United States must increase financial pressure on these actors through various means like anti-money laundering instruments, network sanctions, and targeted sanctions. Supporting pro-democracy and civil society groups in Sudan is also crucial. The US has important interests in Sudan, and by applying financial and diplomatic pressure, they can play a vital role in bringing peace to the region. Lastly, we have President Joe Biden urging Congress's top leaders to keep the government open and provide aid to Ukraine and Israel. The need to avoid a government shutdown and prioritize national security interests is of utmost importance. The clock is ticking, and without a spending deal, parts of the government could scale back operations. The House is under pressure to pass a national security package that includes aid for Ukraine and Israel, which the Senate has already passed. Let's hope they can come to an agreement and keep the government running smoothly. Well, my dear viewers, it's been quite a whirlwind of news today. We've covered everything from European security concerns to electric vehicle earnings, conflicts in Ukraine and Sudan, social media regulation, and government funding. It's a lot to take in, but it's important to stay informed and engaged. Now, over to you. What are your thoughts on these topics? Do you have any questions or insights to share? The floor is yours, my friends. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.